Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm GiGi, flying solo for this. As you know, if you're a regular, Fruit Loops getting ready to have a big surgery on Tuesday. So she's getting ready for that. First off, we want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors, Two Cool T-Shirt Quilts. You can go to twocooltshirtquilts.com/pretty lies and alibis. Check them out. They will know we sent you. So, if you've been with us for a while, we covered the Victoria Rose Smith case, which is local for us several months ago. I'm actually going to put the links back out for the backstory on this case for those of you who aren't familiar. And just real quick to give you a rundown, Victoria Rose Smith and her two brothers were placed in a foster home, which Ariel Robinson and her husband Austin were the foster parents. Ariel had a little wave of reality show fame, I guess you could say. She was on a show called Worst Cooks in America, and I think she actually won that season. And so she had a little bit of an online following, paraded the kids on Instagram, which is a big no-no when you're fostering. You're not supposed to show faces, and was due to adopt these kids actually just a few days after Victoria Rose was murdered, allegedly at her hands. So, what I'm going to do, I'll put those episodes on our social media. Also, I'm going to pin to the top a petition, which the family started, and it is asking for DSS reform, which this case, and it's something that we're seeing on such a regular basis, doing what we do, which is foster kid hurt or killed. And, it's really, really hard. I think the powers that be that make these decisions about funding have got to put more money into DSS to hire more people. We certainly appreciate what DSS workers do. They're just overloaded. They literally cannot take care of the amount of kids on their caseload. There's not enough hours in a day. We have to push for that. And that's what this petition does. So please go and sign it if you haven't. And if you have, share it with your friends and family. We want to get this thing to the top and get some attention on it. So we found out that the trial begins May the 9th. Now she is charged with homicide by child abuse as she allegedly beat Victoria Rose to death in January of last year. Trial's May 9th. I'm going to sit in the trial if I can get a seat every day. I think it's going to be packed in there as soon as the trial starts. It was very crowded today. The judge said that they are bringing in 3 times the normal amount of jurors that they normally bring in just to have a big pool to question during jury selection. So as I'm waiting in the courtroom, I actually see a friend of mine. So I want to say hi to Myra. I got to sit with her during this hearing. I heard a deputy ask if she was there yet, and the other deputy said no. He said that he did see her lawyer bring in some civilian clothes. And the other deputy said, she's dressing out for this. And the other deputy said yes. So at first, her husband, Austin, he has been on $150,000 bond and has been able to be out while awaiting this trial. He's GPS monitored. They have biological kids of their own. He's not allowed to be around them. I think I heard them say, unless there is somebody from DSS present. And so he walks through the door and goes to the podium, and the judge comes in. And I really do like this judge. She needs to read some kind of stories on podcasts because she has a beautiful Southern draw. And but she seems like a very fair judge. But she she asks him, "I understand that you want to plead guilty." And he said, "I do." And so I was really surprised. I wasn't expecting that. I thought this was just going to be some pretrial motions. And we had heard a preliminary, but we know that the grand jury returned a true bill of indictment against Ariel. So usually that eliminates a preliminary hearing. This was just pretrial motions, along with Austin pleading guilty. So what the prosecutor did at this point is she wanted to lay out the facts of the case. So she said on January 14th, 2021 at 2:15, Austin called 911 saying they had an emergency and that their daughter was unresponsive and she had drank a lot of water. He said, "We're trying to do CPR to get it out. Our 3-year-old daughter is choking on water right now." So Ariel had told authorities the night before on January 13th that Victoria Rose had vomited on herself on the way to church. She said they ate pizza at home and then she was fine and they went to bed with no issues. However, Austin said the night before the murder, Ariel got angry because Victoria vomited on herself on the way to church. The prosecutor did say they have camera footage of Ariel taking Victoria Rose outside of the church and said she had on only her underpants, but no visible injuries. We know the next day that she was murdered, there were plenty of injuries on this poor baby. So, according to Ariel, the next morning, Victoria got up and ate pancakes while her and Austin were the only ones at home. Their two biological kids and the other two fosters, which are biological siblings of Victoria, were all at school this day. And Ariel said Victoria kept asking for water, so Austin filled her cup 5 or 6 times. Ariel said Victoria complained of a stomach ache and that she was cold, so she got Victoria a heated blanket and was holding her, and she went limp. Ariel said she tried to do the Heimlich. And the one thing that the prosecutor pointed out is while police were on the scene with the initial call, Austin continued her story and supported her version of events, which is part of the reason he's in trouble. He did not tell them that she beat the child. Investigator McGall, who actually testified today about some body cam issues we're going to get into, he asked Austin, do you feel like her airway was blocked? And he said he wasn't sure, that he was too busy at that point trying to get paramedics on the scene. Investigators asked Ariel about the bruising on Victoria's abdomen and if it was there prior to EMS getting there. And she said, I did that. I was pushing really hard. So when the investigator asked about the extensive bruising on her whole body, there was deep purple marks on her abdomen, her back, and down her legs. Also had a bruise on the ear. Ariel said that this was because her 7-year-old brother had anger issues and he lied a lot. The investigator asked what 7-year-old what could they do to inflict these kind of injuries? And Ariel said that he would grab anything to hit her. So the morning of the murder, Ariel was mad because Victoria was not eating her pancakes fast enough. Austin said that Victoria would get in trouble for taking too long to eat. And at this point, she would put Victoria Rose on a timer for how long she had to eat. So Austin said Victoria asked for several cups of water and that she choked. Austin was outside doing yard work, and he said he could hear the beating taking place inside. And I'm going to give you guys a trigger warning. This is not easy. This deals with child abuse. This is just the reality of what this woman did. And I know we do have some family that listen. So I do want to say trigger warning. If you don't want to hear some really sad, evil stuff, you might want to skip ahead. He said he heard Victoria screaming and crying while this was going on. And he heard Ariel say, "You're not done. You don't get to tell me when you're done." And she's talking about the pancakes. He goes in the house and sees Ariel with the belt. Then he notices all the bruising on Victoria. And Austin said he told Ariel, "Look at her. You've done too much. You've gone too far. You went too far this time." He said the prosecutor said, "Well, why didn't you go in when you heard the beating?" And he really didn't answer that. But he said when he went inside after it was over, Victoria was okay at the time. And he said that she did not have any clothes on and that she was crying. Oh, man. He said Victoria tried to walk to get up the stairs and fell. But Ariel gave her an Epsom salt bath, and Austin left and went to CVS to get medication for the bruises around 1 p.m. Now, remember, 911 was not called until 2:15. So you have over an hour where if he had have called 911, maybe they could have saved her. So you see now a lot of people have said, well, why is he getting charged if he didn't touch her? Well, because he aided all this. He tried to hide it. He deserves to go to prison. This child's dead. They also were able to retrieve camera footage of Austin CVS. So officially, her cause of death was multiple blunt force trauma. Several days after Austin was arrested, his lawyers reached out to the prosecution and they said he wanted to make a statement. And he told police he had personally never hurt Victoria, but Ariel had. And he would spank her and beat her with belts, paddles, flip-flops, her hand, or whatever was his word. He said he doesn't know why, but Victoria got the worst of it out of all the kids, and Ariel would get frustrated with her, especially when it came to how long it took her to eat. So they're talking about, remember, he's pled guilty at this point. His defense attorney says that he has been 100% cooperative with the prosecution. He will testify against Ariel at the trial. He's asked the judge to defer sentencing and allow him to remain free on the $150,000 bond with GPS monitoring until after this trial is finished. And so the judge agreed, and the defense did not object to this. So, it's one of those cases where I was confused because I've always heard the felony rule, which is if you're driving in a car with somebody and you go to do a robbery and you're going to do the robbery, but you didn't know your friend had a gun and somebody gets killed, you get the murder charge. In this case, it to me, I think they need that testimony from him to seal the deal to put her away for life. So, he pled guilty to aiding and abetting homicide by child abuse, faces a minimum of 10 years in prison, up to 20. And the prosecutor again reminded the judge that he did maintain Ariel's story or version of events to investigators on the scene. So after he left, they brought Ariel in, and she smiled at some family that was right behind me. The defense, one of the motions is they do not want body cam footage to be allowed in this trial. And they have multiple body cam recordings from the day of the murder. And the prosecution said Ariel was chatty with law enforcement, and she talked to them even as they're trying to resuscitate Victoria there in the house. So apparently the first responders and law enforcement were kind of horrified by what they saw. And they didn't say it, but I think maybe it came across on body cam footage. And that's one of the reasons maybe her attorney doesn't want that in. So as the first responders are working on Victoria Rose, the prosecution says all this bruising is from her brother, or I'm sorry, the investigator says all this bruising is from her brother. At this point, Ariel was leaning into the room with a lot of people surrounding Victoria Rose trying to work on her. And Ariel tells that her 7-year-old brother did this and that he's a liar and has anger issues. The prosecution said the video shows a total lack of emotion on her part. And this is triggering and disturbing, but they had to drill into Victoria Rose's femur there at the house to try and administer medication to save her life. There was no anesthesia involved. And they said Ariel had her hands on her hips and was volunteering information. And she volunteered information for over 10 minutes, saying she was just trying to be helpful. She said she didn't feel pressured to talk and wanted to tell everybody what happened. So they had a couple of the deputies who wore the body cams get up on the stand to testify. And the first was Detective Patricus. She took the stand to testify, and she was the first responding officer and stayed on that scene for around 5 hours. She was met by the fire department, and the initial call that came in was a drowning. And the fire department asked for police once they saw the extent of Victoria Rose's injuries. She said Ariel came downstairs and said she was Victoria's mother. And she said Ariel was calm, but hyped up and talking a lot. At that point, they took Victoria Rose to the ER, and Ariel was telling the officer about her eating habits and actually showed the officer the leftover pancakes from that breakfast. Asked if she wanted to see half of a popsicle or something like that, too. This officer told Ariel she needed a written statement, and the officer said she could have left if she wanted to. But at one point, Ariel just asked to go to the restroom and wash her hands. And she also asked the investigator if they wanted Victoria's clothing that had vomit on them. The defense asked if this deputy's body cam had been shut off and on, and she said every 20 minutes it cycles, but she did mute it and turn it off a few times. So she kept asking about Victoria's status and wanted to go to the ER. But at that point, if you remember, we're in the depths of COVID, and the protocol was they wouldn't let anybody in there. And also the scene was still active. And at this point, she said she asked her not to leave because DSS was on the way to the house. You have to remember, they still have 2 boys in their custody. So DSS has got to figure out what's going on and what do we do with these boys. At 3:02 p.m., the first capture of body cam was about 30 minutes after her arrival. And at 3:14 and 3:42 p.m., Ariel asks to go to the hospital to see Victoria. At 4:38, Ariel is in the front yard and asks to leave, and the officer says that she really don't need to because she hadn't met with DSS and they're on their way. When DSS does arrive, she said she had asked to go to the hospital several times. The defense attorney asked if this officer had read Ariel her rights, and she said no. So on redirect, the officer said Ariel was not detained and wasn't under arrest and did not need her rights read to her. They also needed her there for the search warrant, and she said all of Ariel's statements were voluntary. So then they get the second sergeant up there, Sergeant McGall. I think the dates kind of jump in this testimony. I tried to make sense of it, but he got the call at lunch and his body cam was actually on charge back in his office. At one point, though, he did get another officer's body cam who was on scene and clipped that onto his belt. So he had a recording of his interactions. He met Ariel in the living room, he said, the next day. And Ariel said she was advised by her adoption attorney not to talk, but she said she was willing to and trying to cooperate with investigators. So she continued to talk. And the sergeant said he interrupted her and said she did not have to talk to him. And the defense asked, did you read her actual Miranda rights from a card? And he said no, because she was not in custody. Austin, her husband, was taken to a police car, but made clear that he did not want to talk without an attorney. The call that came in was a 1089, which was the death of a juvenile also. So the next day on the 15th, he had his body cam on and they went to the house with a search warrant because when they were inside the day before, they noticed there were interior surveillance cameras in the house and they wanted to get that footage. Ariel told him that they wanted to be as helpful as they can and they want this to be over. The sergeant said she spoke freely. So on recross, he did hear Ariel ask to leave, but DSS was coming and he knew there were other kids in the home. The defense says she wasn't in custody, but her freedom was deprived. The defense says when you watch the footage, you'll see Ariel immediately, the prosecution says when you watch the footage, you will actually see her hop on the camera and tell her own version for 10 minutes. So the judge has taken this under advisement. She wants the unredacted body cam footage to watch, and she's expected to rule on that kind of early next week. She said tomorrow's a holiday. So the last motion was the motion to admit photos. There are 7 photos in question of hospital photos and autopsy photos. The first 6 they talked about detailed the injuries, dark purple bruising on the abdomen, back, down the legs. The prosecutor said the medical examiner will tell you Ariel's version of the bruising coming from the Heimlich is pretty much impossible. There is a photo of her at the hospital barely alive that shows her face that the judge did say did not need to be admitted. At this point, I wrote down the prosecutor said she had 11 rounds of epinephrine in this photo and was barely alive. The judge said essentially the other photos show the bruising, so showing her face could be, prejudicial, which I say bring them in, but, one photo shows pattern bruising, which the medical examiner will testify is probably caused by a belt. This is graphic, trigger warning. They want to show a picture from the autopsy of Victoria Rose's leg injuries. She was beaten so viciously that the soft tissue separated from the muscle and she bled out into her legs. And ultimately, that was her cause of death. It was multiple blunt force trauma, but that's how hard this baby was hit with a belt. The prosecutor said there are some things the English language cannot articulate what the eyes can see. And this photo shows why she died. It shows the extreme degree of force that was used on her. And all of this happened at one time because with the church video from the night before, there were no visible injuries. And with Ariel saying it was a third-party admission of guilt by a 7-year-old, the jury needs to see that there's no way a 7-year-old could cause the amount of damage to her legs that she had. So the defense again said the photos are prejudicial and emotional. They don't need the pictures to prove their case, and it can be shown in other ways. So he gave the judge a sketch the medical examiner prepared to show the injuries. So the judge ruled that that wasn't good enough. So the only, as far as I could hear, the only picture that will not come in is the one that shows her face. And the reason they had that was for the ear bruising, but she said that they could easily explain that to the jury. So that was essentially everything that happened in the hearing today. It's just such a horrific case of child abuse, and I can't imagine what her family, Victoria Rose's family, is feeling right now. Um, because the thing is, when her biological mom had her, Victoria Rose was not rushed to the hospital. She was rushed to the hospital because of her foster mom. We got to get change, guys. This can't be happening to our kids. If we can't protect our kids, we are failing on a most basic level as a community and as society. So, anyways, all right, guys, I'm going to keep you updated. I'll be in this trial hopefully every day. So go back and listen to the previous episodes if you haven't to get caught up, and we'll bring it to you every day. All right, guys, see you soon.